The dust kicked up beneath her worn boots as Beatrice Jones ran for her life across the scorched New Mexico landscape, her chest burning and her throat raw from the desert air. Behind her, the thundering of hooves grew ever closer, punctuated by the occasional shout and gunshot as three men outlaws with blood in their eyes and vengeance in their hearts pursued her relentlessly into the setting sun. It was 1878, and Beatrice had never expected to find herself in such dire straits. Just a week ago, she had been the respectable daughter of a storekeeper in Santa Fe, with nothing more pressing on her mind than helping her father with the accounts and politely declining yet another marriage proposal from the banker's son. Now her father was dead, the store burned to the ground, and she was running for her life with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small pouch of coins sewn into the lining of her skirt. "There she is," shouted a gruff voice behind her. "Don't let her get away." Beatrice's lungs felt as though they were filled with fire instead of air. Her legs trembled beneath her, threatening to give out at any moment. The terrain ahead sloped downward into a shallow ravine, and beyond it lay what appeared to be open rangeland with no place to hide. The sun was sinking fast, painting the landscape in blood-red hues that matched the desperation pounding in her veins. A bullet whistled past her ear, kicking up dirt a few feet ahead. Beatrice stumbled, nearly losing her footing on the loose rocks. They were getting closer. Another shot rang out, this one different, sharper, cleaner, coming from somewhere ahead rather than behind. Then came a commanding voice from the ravine below. "That's far enough." A rider on a chestnut stallion appeared on the ridge, rifle aimed not at her but past her toward her pursuers. He fired another warning shot into the air, the sound cracking across the open landscape like thunder. "The lady's under my protection now," the stranger called out, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "Turn back if you value your lives." Beatrice had no time to consider whether this new arrival represented salvation or just another danger. The three outlaws behind her had slowed but not stopped. In her moment of hesitation, the rider spurred his horse forward, and as he galloped past, he leaned down, arm extended. "Take my hand," he shouted. With the last of her strength, Beatrice reached up. Their fingers locked, and with one powerful motion, he pulled her up behind him onto the horse. She grabbed his waist to steady herself as the horse wheeled around to face the outlaws, who had now drawn to a halt about 50 yards away. "This ain't your business, Cowboy," the leader of the gang called out, a tall man with a face pitted by smallpox scars and a black hat pulled low over cold eyes. "The girl's coming with us." "I'm afraid I can't allow that," the cowboy replied calmly, keeping his rifle trained on them. Three men chasing one woman across open country. Doesn't seem like a fair fight to me. Beatrice could feel the tension in his body, the controlled readiness. She held her breath, waiting for the outlaws to make their move. "You don't know what you're getting into," the scarred man warned. "That woman's worth more trouble than gold." "Then I reckon that's my trouble now," the cowboy said firmly. "This is your last warning. Ride away." For a tense moment, no one moved. Beatrice could hear the heavy breathing of the horse beneath them, feel the cowboy's steady heartbeat against her hands where they clutched his shirt. Then, with a curse, the leader of the outlaws gave a signal to his companions. "This ain't over," he spat on the ground. "Not by a long shot." They wheeled their horses around and rode off, dust clouding behind them as they disappeared back over the rise. Only when they were out of sight did the cowboy lower his rifle. He glanced over his shoulder at Beatrice, and for the first time, she saw his face clearly, strong jawline, eyes the color of the sky at dusk, and a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a weathered quality to his features that spoke of years under the sun. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now than when he had confronted the outlaws. Beatrice nodded, suddenly aware of how tightly she was clutching him. She loosened her grip but didn't let go entirely, still afraid she might fall. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse from thirst and fear. "Thank you for stopping them." "Name's Jake Young," he said, guiding his horse at a careful pace down into the ravine. "Got a small spread about 5 miles from here. We'd best get you there before those men decide to come back with reinforcements." "Beatrice Jones," she replied, the formality of the introduction striking her as almost absurd given the circumstances. "Those men, they murdered my father. Burned our store to the ground." Jake nodded grimly. "The Mitchell gang. They've been terrorizing these parts for months now, but why were they after you specifically?" Beatrice hesitated, wondering how much to reveal to this stranger who had saved her life but whom she knew nothing about. "My father. He witnessed something he shouldn't have. Before he died, he told me what he saw. Now they think I know too much." "And do you?" Jake asked, urging his horse into a canter as they reached more level ground. "Yes," Beatrice said quietly, "I do." The sun had almost completely set now, leaving the vast landscape bathed in deepening purple shadows. In the distance, Beatrice could make out the silhouette of mountains against the darkening sky. The air was cooling rapidly, as it always did in the desert once the sun went down, and she shivered slightly. Without comment, Jake unhooked a blanket rolled behind his saddle and passed it back to her. "Wrap this around you. Gets cold out here at night." Beatrice took it gratefully, draping it over her shoulders. "Are we far from?" "Wherever we're going, my ranch. About an hour's ride if we pace it right," Jake replied. "Need to be careful not to push the horse too hard with 2 riders." As they rode, Beatrice tried to make sense of the whirlwind of events that had led her here. Just 1 week ago, her life had been orderly, predictable, perhaps a bit dull, but safe. Then her father had returned from a delivery run to a remote mining camp, ashen-faced and jumpy. He'd locked the store early, pulled down all the blinds, and told her what he'd seen. 3 men murdering a U.S. Marshal in cold blood over a strongbox of gold. He'd recognized the killers as the Mitchell gang, notorious outlaws with a reputation for never leaving witnesses alive. "We need to alert the authorities," her father had insisted. "That poor man had a family waiting for him. They deserve justice." But before they could go to the sheriff, the gang had tracked her father down. They'd come in the night, torched the store, and shot her father as he tried to help Beatrice escape through the back door. His final words to her had been to run, to find Sheriff Miller in the next county, and tell him everything. She'd been running ever since, staying off the main trails, moving mostly at night. But somehow, the Mitchell gang had picked up her trail outside of a small settlement called Chisholm Ranch, and she'd been forced to flee across open country in broad daylight. "Miss Jones." Jake's voice pulled her from her dark thoughts. "You still with me?" "Yes," she said, blinking away the memory of flames consuming her childhood home. "I'm sorry, it's been a difficult few days." "No need to apologize," he said. "We'll be at my place soon. You can rest there, get cleaned up, have a proper meal." "And then what?" Beatrice couldn't keep the edge of desperation from her voice. "Those men won't stop coming after me. I need to reach Sheriff Miller in Grant County. He was my father's friend." Jake was quiet for a moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of his horse's hooves on the hard, packed earth, and the occasional call of a night bird. "Grant County's at least 3 days' ride from here," he finally said. "And that's assuming the Mitchell gang doesn't catch up to you again. They know this territory as well as I do." "I have to try," Beatrice insisted. "My father died to give me the chance to tell what he saw." "I understand," Jake said, his tone suggesting that perhaps he did. "But you won't do your father's memory any good by getting yourself killed. Rest at my ranch tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure out the safest way to get you where you need to go." The logic of his words was undeniable, and Beatrice felt some of the tension leave her body. The steady rocking motion of the horse combined with the utter exhaustion of the past week began to lull her into a state of half-sleep. Without meaning to, she found herself leaning more heavily against Jake's back, her head resting between his shoulder blades. "Rest if you can," he said softly, seeming to sense her fatigue. "I'll wake you when we get there." Beatrice meant to protest that she was fine, that she could stay alert, but the words never came. Instead, she surrendered to the exhaustion, her last conscious thought being a mixture of gratitude toward this stranger and wariness about what the coming days might bring. She drifted in and out of consciousness as they rode, vaguely aware of the changing terrain, the sounds of night creatures, and the constant, reassuring presence of Jake Young, solid and steady before her. At some point, she became aware that they were slowing down, and she forced her eyes open. A small ranch house came into view, lamplight glowing softly from its windows. A barn stood nearby, along with a corral where several horses moved like shadows in the darkness. It wasn't a large spread, but it had the look of a place well cared for. "Here we are," Jake said, guiding his horse toward the barn. "Home sweet home." As they dismounted, Beatrice's legs nearly buckled beneath her, stiff from the ride and weak from days of little food and less sleep. Jake caught her elbow to steady her, his touch gentle but firm. "Easy there," he said. "Let's get you inside." After quickly settling his horse for the night, Jake led Beatrice to the ranch house. It was a simple structure, but solid, with a stone fireplace and sturdy furniture. A pot of something savory smelling hung over the banked fire. "Sit," Jake instructed, gesturing to a wooden chair at a small table. "I'll heat up some stew." Too exhausted to argue, Beatrice sank into the chair, still wrapped in the blanket he had given her. As Jake busied himself with stoking the fire and preparing food, she took the opportunity to study him more closely. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable in his own skin, no motion wasted. His clothes were well-worn but clean denims, a faded blue shirt, boots that had seen many miles. A gun belt hung over the back of another chair, the revolver still in its holster. On a peg by the door hung a broad-brimmed hat. "Have you lived here long?" Beatrice asked, breaking the silence. Jake glanced over at her as he stirred the pot. "About 5 years now. Came west after the war with not much more than my horse and the clothes on my back. Worked as a ranch hand, then a foreman. Saved enough to buy this place when the previous owner decided to move back east. You were in the war." She tried to calculate his age. He would have been young, perhaps barely old enough to enlist. A shadow crossed his face. "Joined up in '64, lied about my age. I was 16 but big for my years, saw things no boy should see." "I'm sorry," Beatrice said softly. Jake shrugged, his expression clearing. "It was a long time ago. War's over now." He ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her, along with a chunk of bread. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." The stew was simple beef, potatoes, and carrots in a rich broth, but to Beatrice, it tasted like heaven. She hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful passed her lips. Jake sat across from her with his own bowl, watching her with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "When you're finished," he said, "there's a small room off the back where you can sleep. It's not much, but the bed's clean." "Thank you," Beatrice said, pausing in her eating, "for all of this. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." Jake's eyes met hers, serious and direct. "Those men who were chasing you, the Mitchell gang, they're dangerous, Miss Jones. real dangerous. Frank Mitchell doesn't let go of a grudge, and he doesn't leave witnesses. Whatever your father saw, whatever you know, it's got them scared enough to risk a lot to silence you." Beatrice set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly diminished. "They murdered a U.S. Marshal," she said quietly. "My father saw them do it. He was delivering supplies to a mining camp when he heard shots. He hid and watched as they killed the marshal and took a strongbox he'd been transporting. Gold from the mines, meant for a bank in Santa Fe." Jake let out a low whistle. "That would explain it. Killing a federal marshal carries a hanging sentence, and stealing that much gold, they'd be looking at serious time even without the murder. My father wanted to report what he'd seen to the proper authorities," Beatrice continued. "He knew Sheriff Miller in Grant County, said he was honest and wouldn't be bought off, but before we could leave, they found us." She swallowed hard, the memory of that night still raw. "They set fire to our store with us still inside. My father, he helped me get out through the back, but he was shot before he could follow. His last words were to find Sheriff Miller and tell him everything." Jake reached across the table, his hand covering hers briefly in a gesture of comfort. "I'm sorry about your father. He sounds like a brave man." "He was," Beatrice said, blinking back tears. "He always said that standing up for what's right isn't a choice, it's a duty." "Wise words," Jake nodded. He was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider something. "First light tomorrow, we'll figure out how to get you to Grant County safely. But for now, you need rest." After they finished eating, Jake showed her to the small bedroom he had mentioned. It was indeed tiny, with just enough room for a narrow bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a hook on the wall for clothes. But it was clean, as he had promised, the sheets on the bed fresh-smelling. "I'll be in the main room if you need anything," Jake told her, lingering in the doorway. "There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up." "Thank you," Beatrice said again, feeling that the words were inadequate for the debt she owed him, for everything. Jake simply nodded, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Sleep well, Miss Jones." After he left, closing the door behind him, Beatrice poured water into the bowl and washed her face and hands, the cool liquid washing away some of the dust and exhaustion of the day. She removed her boots and outer clothing but kept on her chemise and petticoat, too aware of being in a stranger's home to undress completely. As she lay down on the bed, she realized this was the first time in nearly a week that she had slept on anything other than the hard ground, hidden in whatever shelter she could find. Despite the precariousness of her situation, despite the knowledge that 3 killers were hunting her, she felt safer than she had since the night her father died. With that thought, she surrendered to sleep, her last conscious awareness being the sound of Jake moving quietly in the other room, a reassuring reminder that she was, for the moment at least, not alone. Beatrice woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the kitchen. For a moment, disoriented, she thought she was back in her room above the store in Santa Fe and that her father was already up, preparing to open for the day's business. Then memory rushed back: the fire, the pursuit, the cowboy who had saved her. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles. Sunlight streamed through a small window, suggesting it was well into morning. Hastily, she dressed, splashed water on her face from the pitcher, and did her best to tidy her hair with her fingers. Her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand showed a face she hardly recognized, thinner, with shadows under the eyes, a smudge of dirt still visible along her jawline. But her eyes were clearer than they had been in days, the fog of exhaustion somewhat lifted by a night of actual sleep. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Jake at the stove frying bacon. He looked up at her entrance, his expression warming slightly. "Morning," he said. "Thought you might sleep the day away. You were out like a light when I checked on you earlier." "You should have woken me," Beatrice said, embarrassed at having slept so late. "I didn't mean to impose on your hospitality for so long." Jake waved away her concern. "You needed the rest. Besides, it gave me time to do some thinking about how to get you to Grant County safely." He gestured to the table where 2 plates waited. "Sit, eat something, then we'll talk strategy." The breakfast was simple but filling: bacon, biscuits, and strong coffee. As they ate, Jake outlined his plan. "The main road to Grant County passes right through Mitchell territory," he explained. "They'll have men watching it, expecting you to head that way. But there's another route, harder, longer, but safer. Takes you through the mountains, then down into the county from the north. It's a path few know about, mostly trappers and the occasional prospector." "You know this path?" Beatrice asked, hope rising within her. Jake nodded. "I do. Used to hunt those mountains before I settled here. It'll take 4, maybe 5 days instead of 3, but the Mitchell gang won't be looking for you there." "We should leave as soon as possible then," Beatrice said, eager now that a plan was forming. "There's more," Jake said, his expression turning serious. "I can't take you all the way. Got responsibilities here I can't abandon for that long. But I know someone who can guide you the rest of the way once we reach the mountain, pass an old trapper named Harlan who lives up there. He's odd, keeps to himself mostly, but he's trustworthy and knows those mountains better than anyone." Beatrice felt a flicker of disappointment at the news that Jake wouldn't be accompanying her the entire way, followed immediately by guilt at the feeling. He had already done far more for her than she had any right to expect. "That's very kind of you," she said. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you for your help." "No need," Jake said gruffly. "Anyone decent would do the same." But Beatrice wasn't so sure. In the week since her father's murder, she had encountered more people willing to look the other way than those willing to help a woman in trouble. The storekeeper who had refused to sell her supplies when he realized she was being hunted. The station master who had pretended not to see her when she tried to buy a ticket on the eastbound train. Fear was a powerful motivator, and the Mitchell gang inspired plenty of it in these parts. "When do we leave?" she asked instead of voicing these thoughts. "Within the hour," Jake replied. "I need to finish a few chores, make arrangements for the livestock while I'm gone, and we'll need to pack provisions. It's rough country where we're headed." While Jake tended to his ranch duties, Beatrice insisted on helping prepare for their journey. She inventoried the food supplies, packing dried beef, beans, flour, coffee, and other essentials into saddlebags. She found a water skin hanging on a peg and filled it at the pump outside. Every action felt purposeful, a step toward justice for her father and the murdered marshal. Just as they were nearly ready to depart, the sound of approaching hoofbeats caused them both to freeze. Jake moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously. "2 riders," he reported, his voice tight. "Coming fast. Get in the back room and stay there until I call for you." Beatrice didn't argue. She slipped into the bedroom, closing the door most of the way but leaving it open a crack so she could hear what transpired. From her vantage point, she could see Jake check his revolver, then replace it in its holster before stepping out onto the porch to meet the visitors. Through the window, she watched as 2 men on horseback pulled up in front of the ranch house. They weren't members of the Mitchell gang, at least, not the 3 who had been chasing her. These men were younger, dressed like cowboys rather than outlaws, though the distinction was sometimes thin. "Morning, Jake," one of them called, tipping his hat. "Hope we ain't disturbing you too early." "Ben, Tom," Jake nodded to each in turn, his stance relaxed but alert. "What brings you boys out this way?" Words going around, the one called Ben said, leaning forward on his saddle horn. "Mitchell gang's looking for a woman. Young, brown hair, traveling alone." offering a fair bit of money to anyone who spots her and reports back. That's so. Jake's voice betrayed nothing. And what's this woman supposed to have done? The second rider, Tom, shrugged. Stole something valuable, way I heard it. Frank Mitchell's mighty keen to get it back. Well, I haven't seen any lone women passing through, Jake said evenly. But I'll keep an eye out, let you know if I do. Ben nodded, but his eyes strayed to the two horses saddled and packed near the barn. Going somewhere. Just up to the high pasture to check on some strays, Jake said without hesitation. Been missing a couple of yearlings. Thought they might have wandered up that way. Tom seemed satisfied with this explanation, but Ben's gaze lingered on the horses, noting the amount of supplies packed. That's a lot of provisions for a day trip, he observed. Planning to stay out a couple of nights if I need to, Jake replied, his tone still casual. Those yearlings could be anywhere in the upper valley. Ben nodded slowly, but Beatrice could tell from his expression that he wasn't entirely convinced. Well, if you spot that woman, the Mitchells are offering $50 for information leading to her. $50, huh? Jake let out a low whistle. Must be something mighty valuable she took. That's what I figured, Ben agreed. Anyway, we won't keep you. Good luck finding those yearlings. The men tipped their hats and turned their horses, but as they rode away, Beatrice saw Ben glance back at the ranch house with a speculative look that sent a chill through her. Jake remained on the porch until the riders were well out of sight, then came back inside, his expression grim. We need to leave now, he said as Beatrice emerged from the bedroom. Ben Whitaker's not stupid. He suspects something, and he's not above earning $50 by reporting back to the Mitchells. Who were they? Beatrice asked, grabbing her few belongings. Hands from the Triple Bar Ranch about 10 miles east, Jake explained, checking his gun again before holstering it. Not bad men necessarily, but not ones to pass up easy money either. And $50 is more than a month's wages for a ranch hand. They worked quickly and silently, finishing the preparations for their journey. Jake added an extra revolver and ammunition to the supplies, along with a rifle in a scabbard that attached to his saddle. You know how to shoot? He asked Beatrice as they led the horses from the barn. My father taught me, she replied. Said a woman alone should know how to defend herself. Jake nodded approvingly. Good. We'll hope it doesn't come to that, but better prepared than sorry. They mounted up, Jake on his chestnut stallion and Beatrice on a smaller, dun-colored mare that Jake assured her was steady and sure-footed, ideal for mountain terrain. As they rode away from the ranch, Beatrice couldn't help glancing back at the small house that had provided her first safe haven in a week. She had a feeling it would be a long time before she enjoyed such safety again. Instead of taking the main trail, Jake led them across a shallow stream and into a stand of cottonwoods. They rode in silence for the first hour, both alert for any sign of pursuit. The terrain gradually began to change, the relatively flat rangeland giving way to rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines and juniper. We'll be in the foothills by nightfall, Jake said when they paused to rest the horses near midday. From there, it gets steeper. The real mountains start tomorrow. Beatrice nodded, taking a sip from the canteen he passed her. How far to this trapper's cabin, Harlan? You said his name was? 2 days if the weather holds, Jake replied, scanning the horizon behind them. Then another 2 or 3 from his place to Grant County, depending on the pace he sets. They ate a quick meal of jerky and hardtack, then mounted up again. As the day wore on, Beatrice found herself studying Jake when he wasn't looking. There was something about him that intrigued her, a sense of contained strength, of principles held firm. He wasn't particularly talkative, but when he did speak, his words carried weight. May I ask you something? She said as they navigated a narrow path through increasingly rocky terrain, Jake glanced back at her, eyebrow raised. "Ask away." "Why are you helping me, really?" She met his gaze steadily. "You could have just scared off those outlaws yesterday and gone on your way. Instead, you're risking your life to help a stranger." Jake was quiet for so long that Beatrice thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he were talking to himself. "After the war, I drifted for a while. Did things I'm not proud of. Then one day I came across a family stranded on the trail, wagon axle broken, no help for miles. Father, mother, 3 young children. They were sitting ducks for any bandits that came along." He paused, his eyes on the trail ahead. "I could have ridden past. Plenty did. But something made me stop, help them fix that axle, escort them to the next town." He looked back at Beatrice, his eyes clear and direct. The gratitude in that woman's eyes. The way those kids looked at me like I was some kind of hero. It reminded me of who I wanted to be, not who the war had made me. So I guess I help because every time I do, it makes me a little more the man I aim to be, rather than the one I fear becoming. The honesty of his answer caught Beatrice by surprise. It was more than she had expected, a glimpse into the soul of this quiet cowboy who had come to her rescue. She found herself wanting to know more about him, about the experiences that had shaped him. "The war was hard on everyone," she said softly. "My father lost his brother at Gettysburg. He never really recovered from it." Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Some wounds don't show on the outside." They lapsed into silence again, but it was a different quality of silence, now companionable rather than cautious. As they rode higher into the foothills, the view expanded behind them, revealing the vast expanse of territory they had crossed. In the far distance, Beatrice could just make out what might have been riders, though they were too far away to identify. "Someone's following us," she said, pointing. Jake pulled up his horse, reaching for the spyglass in his saddlebag. He studied the distant figures for a long moment, his expression hardening. 4 riders, he reported. "Can't be sure from this distance, but could be the Mitchell gang. They must have gotten word from those ranch hands faster than I expected." "What do we do?" Beatrice asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Jake considered for a moment, surveying the terrain ahead. "We've got the advantage of higher ground and a head start. They'll have to follow our exact trail, which will slow them down. We push on, try to reach the pass before nightfall. There's a place there we can defend if we need to." They increased their pace as much as the increasingly difficult terrain would allow. The sun was lowering toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The air grew cooler as they climbed, and Beatrice was grateful for the wool jacket Jake had insisted she take from his supplies before they left. As dusk approached, they reached a narrow pass between 2 rocky outcroppings. Just beyond it, sheltered by a stand of ponderosa pines, was a small natural clearing beside a spring-fed stream. "We'll camp here," Jake decided, dismounting and helping Beatrice down from her horse. "Good water, decent cover, and only one approach to defend if they catch up to us tonight." They worked together to make camp, tending to the horses first before Jake showed Beatrice how to set up a fire in a way that minimized smoke. He positioned it in a depression where the surrounding rocks would reflect heat back toward them while hiding the flames from distant observation. "You've done this before," Beatrice observed as Jake efficiently set about preparing a meal of beans and salt pork. He smiled slightly, the first real smile she had seen from him. "Spent a fair bit of time in the mountains after the war. Sometimes a man needs solitude to sort through his thoughts." "And did you sort through them?" she asked, helping by setting out the tin plates and cups he had packed. "Some," Jake admitted. "Enough to know I wanted to build something rather than destroy. That's when I started working toward having my own place. As they ate their simple meal, the stars emerged overhead, brilliant and clear in the mountain air. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or the soft nickering of the horses. It should have been peaceful, but Beatrice couldn't shake the knowledge that somewhere below them, men who wanted her dead were following their trail. "Try to get some rest," Jake said when they had finished eating and cleaned up the few utensils. "I'll take first watch." "I'll wake you in a few hours. I'm not sure I can sleep," Beatrice admitted, "not knowing they're out there." Jake regarded her thoughtfully. "Fear's natural, Miss Jones. Anyone with sense feels it when there's danger. But don't let it master you. We've got good position and I'm a light sleeper." Beatrice nodded, drawing her blanket closer around her shoulders as she settled near the fire. "My father used to say something similar. Fear is the mind's warning, not its master. He said his father taught him that." "Wise family, the Joneses," Jake commented, checking his revolver before settling with his back against a rock where he could observe the pass they had come through. Despite her anxiety, the warmth of the fire and the exhaustion of the day soon lulled Beatrice toward sleep. The last thing she remembered was watching Jake's profile against the starry sky, his expression alert but calm, a sentinel between her and those who wished her harm. She woke to his hand on her shoulder, gentle but insistent. The fire had burned down to embers and the night had deepened around them. For a moment she was disoriented, then memory rushed back. "My turn to watch," she asked, sitting up. Jake nodded. "No sign of pursuit yet, but stay alert. Wake me at the first hint of anything unusual." He showed her how to add wood to the fire without causing much smoke, then settled on his bedroll, his revolver close at hand. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into the rhythm of sleep, though Beatrice suspected he could be fully alert in an instant if needed. The night was peaceful, almost eerily so after the tension of the past days. Beatrice found herself studying Jake's sleeping face in the dim firelight. In repose, he looked younger, the lines of vigilance smoothed away. She wondered about his life before the war, about the family that had raised him, about the experiences that had shaped him into the man who would risk himself to help a stranger. The hours of her watch passed without incident. The moon rose, casting silver light across the clearing, then began its descent toward the western horizon. Just as Beatrice was about to wake Jake for his turn to sleep, a sound from the pass below caught her attention, the faint but unmistakable clink of metal on stone. She moved quickly to Jake's side, placing her hand on his shoulder. His eyes opened immediately, fully alert, and she pressed a finger to her lips, pointing toward the pass. He nodded in understanding, reaching for his rifle as he silently rose to a crouch. Motioning for her to stay low, Jake moved to a position behind a large boulder that overlooked the approach to their campsite. Beatrice, ignoring his instruction to stay back, picked up the revolver he had left on his bedroll and followed, staying in the shadows as she found her own place of concealment. For several long minutes, they waited in silence. Then, at the far end of the pass, a figure appeared, just a shadow at first, then gradually taking the form of a man leading a horse. He moved cautiously, stopping every few yards to listen. Jake raised his rifle, sighting along the barrel. Beatrice held her breath, finger poised near the trigger of the revolver, though she knew she was too far away for an accurate shot. The figure advanced further into the pass, and now Beatrice could see it was a man in a black hat, one of the outlaws who had pursued her across the plain. He was alone, probably sent ahead to scout their position while the others waited below. Jake's rifle cracked, the sound echoing off the rocky walls of the pass. The shot struck the ground just in front of the outlaw, sending up a spray of dust and pebbles. The man ducked behind a boulder, his hand going to his holster. "That's close enough," Jake called out, his voice carrying clearly in the night air. "Next shot won't be a warning." There was a moment of tense silence, then the outlaw's voice came back, hard-edged and mocking. "You're outnumbered, Cowboy. Frank Mitchell and the boys are right behind me. You've got something that belongs to us, and we aim to get it back." "The lady doesn't belong to you or anyone else," Jake replied steadily, "and she's under my protection." A harsh laugh echoed through the pass. "Protection? You're one man with a rifle. We're four, and we've been tracking and killing a lot longer than you've been playing rancher." "Maybe so," Jake conceded, "but I've got high ground and plenty of ammunition. How many of you will die trying to get up this pass? You willing to be the first?" Another silence followed, longer this time. Beatrice could almost feel the outlaw weighing his options, calculating the odds. "This isn't over," he finally called. "Frank Mitchell doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive. That woman's a dead woman walking, and anyone helping her is just as dead." "Your concern is touching," Jake replied dryly. "Now back out of this pass before I decide that warning shot was too generous." After a moment, Beatrice saw the outlaw retreat, leading his horse back the way he had come. When he was out of sight, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "They'll be back," she said quietly. Jake nodded, lowering his rifle. "Yes, but not tonight. They'll wait for daylight, try to find another way up, which is why we need to be moving before dawn." They returned to their camp, but there was no more sleep for either of them. Instead, they packed up their supplies by the dim light of the banked fire, speaking little but working in efficient tandem, as if they had done this many times before. As the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, they mounted their horses and continued their journey, following a trail that grew steeper and more challenging with each passing mile. Jake set a grueling pace, pushing both themselves and the horses to their limits. By mid-morning, they had climbed high enough that the air had thinned noticeably, and the landscape had changed dramatically. Pine forests gave way to more sparse vegetation, and the views from the switchbacks in the trail revealed the vast territory below, stretching away to the horizon. "Can you see them?" Beatrice asked during a brief rest to water the horses at a mountain stream. Jake scanned the terrain below with his spyglass. "Yes, about 2 hours behind us. They found another route up as I expected. Will we reach Harlan's cabin before they catch up?" Beatrice couldn't keep the worry from her voice. Jake considered this, studying the sun's position. "It'll be close. But even if we don't, there are places along this trail where one man with a rifle can hold off several. If it comes to that, I'll delay them while you go on ahead." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "I won't leave you to face them alone." Jake looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing past the surface to something deeper. "You're quite a woman, Beatrice Jones." The use of her first name, the first time he had done so, sent an unexpected warmth through her despite the cool mountain air. "And you're quite a man, Jake Young," she replied softly. "Not many would do what you're doing for a stranger." Something flickered in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, or a possibility. But whatever it was, he didn't pursue it. Instead, he turned back to his horse. "We should keep moving," he said. "The higher we get, the harder it'll be for them to follow quickly." They rode on, the trail narrowing as it wound along the mountainside. In places, it was barely wide enough for a single horse, with a sheer drop on one side that made Beatrice's stomach clench. Jake led the way, occasionally glancing back to make sure she was managing the difficult terrain. By mid-afternoon, they had reached a high alpine meadow ringed by towering peaks still capped with snow despite the summer season. A small cabin was visible at the far edge of the meadow, smoke curling from its stone chimney. "Harlan's place," Jake said, relief evident in his voice. "We made it." They urged their tired horses across the meadow, and as they approached, the cabin door opened to reveal a figure almost as gnarled and weather-beaten as the twisted pine next to his dwelling. Harlan was old, at least 70. Beatrice guessed, with a long white beard and eyes that had spent decades squinting into mountain sunlight. He held a rifle casually in the crook of one arm, neither threatening nor entirely welcoming. "Jake Young," the old man called as they drew closer. "Been a while since you showed your face in these parts." "Too long," Jake agreed, dismounting and approaching with a hand extended. "Good to see you still keeping watch over this mountain, Harlan." The old trapper ignored the offered hand, instead giving Jake a quick, hard hug that seemed to surprise the younger man. "What brings you up to my neck of the woods? And with a lady, no less." Jake quickly explained their situation while Beatrice dismounted and stretched her legs, stiff from the long ride. Harlan listened intently, his weathered face growing more serious as Jake described the Mitchell gang and their pursuit. "Frank Mitchell," the old man spat on the ground. "Know of him? Bad blood in that family going back 3 generations. His grandfather was a murderer too." "Then you understand why we need your help," Jake said. "Miss Jones needs to reach Sheriff Miller in Grant County. I can't take her all the way myself, but I was hoping you might guide her through the northern pass." Harlan studied Beatrice for a long moment, his eyes sharp despite his years. "You got sand, girl, running from the likes of Frank Mitchell. Most would have gone to ground, changed their name, tried to disappear. My father taught me that running from evil only lets it grow stronger," Beatrice replied steadily. "Those men murdered a U.S. Marshal and my father. They need to face justice." A smile cracked through Harlan's beard. "I like her, Jake. She's got backbone." He turned back to Beatrice. "I'll take you to Grant County, miss. Been meaning to make a supply run anyway. We can leave at first light tomorrow." "Thank you," Beatrice said sincerely. "But you folks got more pressing concerns right now," Harlan continued, turning to point toward the trail they had ascended. "Got company coming." In the distance, Beatrice could see 4 riders making their way up the final stretch of trail toward the meadow. The Mitchell gang had caught up to them sooner than expected. "Get inside," Jake said urgently, leading the horses toward a small corral next to the cabin. "Harlan, any way out of this meadow besides the main trail?" "There's a game path on the north side," the trapper replied, helping them secure the horses. "Steep and treacherous. Not for riding, but a person on foot could manage it in a pinch." They hurried into the cabin, which was surprisingly neat and well organized for a man who lived alone in the wilderness. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and various pelts decorated the walls. Harlan immediately moved to a gun rack, selecting a shotgun to complement the rifle he already held. "Been a while since I had a proper fight," he commented, checking the shotgun's action. "Might be refreshing." Jake positioned himself at a window that overlooked the approach to the cabin, rifle at the ready. "We don't want to fight if we can avoid it." 4 against 3 aren't odds I'd choose, especially with Mitchell involved. He's got a reputation as a dead shot. "What's the alternative?" Beatrice asked, accepting a revolver that Harlan handed her. "We try to reason with them," Jake said, though his tone suggested he didn't hold much hope for that approach. "Reason with Frank Mitchell," Harlan snorted. "Might as well try to reason with a rattlesnake." The riders were closer now, their features becoming distinguishable as they approached across the meadow. In the lead was a tall man with a face marred by smallpox scars, the leader who had confronted them on the plain. Behind him rode 3 others, all armed, all with the hard look of men who killed without remorse. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, just out of effective revolver range but close enough for rifles to be accurate. The scarred man, Frank Mitchell, raised a hand in what might have been mistaken for a friendly greeting if not for the cold calculation in his eyes. "Come out, Cowboy," he called. "Bring the woman. No need for this to get messy." Jake opened the cabin door but remained in the doorway, his rifle visible but not aimed. "The lady's not going anywhere with you, Mitchell. She's under my protection and that of the law." Mitchell's laugh was harsh in the clear mountain air. "Law? There's no law up here except what a man makes with his gun. And right now, my men and I make the law." "What do you want with Miss Jones?" Jake called back, playing for time, though they all knew the answer. "She's got information that doesn't belong to her," Mitchell replied. "Information that could cause me and my boys considerable inconvenience. I aim to ensure that information dies with her, just like it died with her father." Beatrice felt a cold rage building inside her at the casual mention of her father's murder. Before Jake could respond, she stepped forward, moving to stand beside him in the doorway. "You murdered my father," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "And a U.S. Marshal before him. You're a coward who kills innocent people to cover your crimes." Mitchell's expression hardened. "Your father should have minded his own business, girl, just like you should have. Now you'll die like he did." "I don't think so," Jake said, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "Miss Jones is going to Grant County to tell Sheriff Miller exactly what she and her father witnessed. You and your men would be wise to ride away while you still can." Mitchell's hand moved toward his holster, but he didn't draw. "Not yet. 3 of you, 4 of us. And we've got you pinned in that cabin. This doesn't end well for you, Cowboy." "Maybe not," Jake acknowledged, "but I guarantee at least 2 of you won't live to see the outcome. Are you willing to bet you won't be one of them?" A tense silence followed, broken only by the soft whickering of horses and the whisper of wind through the pines. Beatrice could feel the weight of the moment, the balance between life and death as precarious as a feather on a knife's edge. Then, suddenly, one of Mitchell's men, a wiry individual with a patchy beard, made a quick, almost imperceptible movement toward his holster. Jake's rifle came up in a fluid motion, and a shot cracked across the meadow. The man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, his revolver dropping unfired to the ground. In an instant, the peaceful meadow erupted into chaos. Mitchell and his remaining men drew their weapons, firing as they scattered for cover. Jake pushed Beatrice back inside the cabin, slamming the door as bullets splintered the wood around them. "So much for reasoning with them," Harlan commented dryly, taking position at another window. "Told you Mitchell was like a rattlesnake." The gunfight that followed was brief but intense. Mitchell and his men had the advantage of numbers but were exposed in the open meadow. Jake, Beatrice, and Harlan had the benefit of the cabin's solid walls. Bullets thudded into the logs or whistled through the windows as the outlaws attempted to suppress their fire enough to advance. Beatrice found herself at a small side window, the revolver Harlan had given her gripped firmly in both hands. When one of Mitchell's men tried to circle around to the back of the cabin, she took careful aim and fired. She missed, but the shot was close enough to send the man diving for cover behind a water trough. "Good shot," Harlan called from his position. "Keep him pinned there." Jake, meanwhile, was engaged in a deadly duel with Mitchell himself, who had taken cover behind a large boulder. The outlaw leader was indeed a skilled marksman, his shots coming dangerously close each time Jake exposed himself to fire. "We can't hold them off forever," Jake said during a momentary lull in the shooting. "Sooner or later they'll work their way closer or find a way to smoke us out." Harlan nodded grimly. "Been thinking the same. Reckon it's time for that game trail I mentioned." "You two go," Jake said immediately. "I'll keep them occupied long enough for you to get clear." "No," Beatrice said firmly. "I won't leave you here to die for me." Not for you, Jake corrected, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. With you, because it's the right thing to do, because some things are worth fighting for, even dying for. For a moment, the gunfire outside seemed to fade away, and there was only Jake and the truth in his eyes, a truth that spoke of honor and courage and perhaps something more, something just beginning to take root between them. "I'm staying too," Harlan declared, breaking the moment. "This is my home, and I'm too old and ornery to be chased out of it by the likes of Frank Mitchell." Jake looked between them, frustration evident on his face. But before he could argue further, a new sound reached them, hoofbeats, many of them, approaching from the direction of the trail. All three froze, listening. The gunfire from Mitchell and his men had stopped too, suggesting they had also heard the newcomers. Through the window, Beatrice could see riders emerging from the tree-lined 8 men, all wearing badges that caught the afternoon sun. "The cavalry's arrived," Harlan chuckled. "Unexpected, but I ain't complaining." At the head of the group rode a tall man with a silver star on his chest and the weathered look of a lawman who had seen his share of trouble. He reined in his horse and assessed the situation with practiced eyes. "Frank Mitchell," the sheriff called out. "This is Sheriff Miller from Grant County. You and your men are surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." Beatrice gasped at the name. "Sheriff Miller, but how?" Jake looked as confused as she felt. "I have no idea." "But I'm not questioning our good fortune." Outside, Mitchell's voice rose in defiance. "This isn't your jurisdiction, Miller. You got no authority here." "I've got 8 deputies who say differently," Miller replied calmly, "and a federal warrant for your arrest for the murder of U.S. Marshal James Harrington. Make your choice, Mitchell, surrender or die where you stand." For a tense moment, it seemed Mitchell might choose the latter option. Then, with a curse audible even inside the cabin, he tossed his revolver to the ground. One by one, his men followed suit. Jake opened the cabin door cautiously, rifle still at the ready. Beatrice and Harlan followed, watching as Sheriff Miller's deputies moved in to disarm and secure the outlaws. "Sheriff Miller," Jake called. "Jake Young. The lady with me is Beatrice Jones. She's the witness you're looking for in the Marshal Harrington case." Miller dismounted and approached them, his expression shifting from stern authority to something warmer as he looked at Beatrice. "Miss Jones, I've been looking for you ever since I got word about your father. Samuel Jones was a good friend of mine." "You knew?" Beatrice asked, still trying to process this unexpected turn of events. "About the marshal, about my father," Miller nodded grimly. "Got a telegram from Santa Fe about your father's murder. When I heard the Mitchell gang was involved, and that you were missing, I put it together with the marshal's killing. Been tracking you ever since, but you were hard to find until a couple of ranch hands reported seeing a woman matching your description at a ranch east of here." Ben and Tom, Jake realized. They didn't report to Mitchell first. They went to the law. "Seems there's still some decency left in these parts," Harlan commented, as Mitchell and his men were led away, secured on their own horses with hands bound. Sheriff Miller turned to Jake. "Mr. Young, I owe you my thanks for protecting Miss Jones. Not many would have taken such a risk for a stranger." Jake glanced at Beatrice, something soft in his eyes that hadn't been there before. "She's not exactly a stranger anymore, Sheriff." Miller looked between them, a knowing expression crossing his weathered face. "I see. Well, Miss Jones, if you're willing, I'd like to take your statement about what your father witnessed. With your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, the Mitchell gang won't see the outside of a prison for the rest of their lives." "Of course," Beatrice agreed. "That's what my father would have wanted, justice for the marshal and for himself." As preparations were made for the journey back to Grant County, Beatrice found a moment alone with Jake near the corral. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the meadow, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers. "So," she said, suddenly uncertain how to express the tumult of emotions within her, "I suppose this is where we part ways." Jake looked at her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the same uncertainty she felt. "I suppose it is. You'll go to Grant County, give your statement. Justice will be served. And you'll return to your ranch," Beatrice added, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Yes," Jake said slowly, "my ranch, my horses, my empty house." The way he said it with a note of quiet resignation made Beatrice's heart ache. In the brief time she had known this man, he had risked his life for her, shown her kindness when she most needed it, and awakened feelings she had never expected to experience. "It doesn't have to be empty," she said softly, taking a step closer to him. "After I've given my statement, after all this is over, I could come back, if you wanted." Jake's expression transformed, hope kindling in his eyes like the first light of dawn. "You do that. Come back to a small ranch in the middle of nowhere, with a former soldier who sometimes wakes in the night still fighting a war long ended." Beatrice reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I would. Because in the middle of the worst moment of my life, when I was running for my life with no hope in sight, you fired a warning shot and pulled me up. You saved me, Jake Young. Not just my life, but my faith in humanity." He looked down at their joined hands, then back up to her face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded in kind. It was a kiss that spoke of possibilities, of futures not yet written but suddenly imaginable. When they parted, Jake's smile was unlike any she had seen from him before, open, unguarded, filled with promise. "Then I'll be waiting, Beatrice Jones. However long it takes." "It won't be long," she assured him. "A few weeks at most, just enough time for you to prepare for a guest who might stay indefinitely." "I'll count the days," he replied, his voice husky with emotion. As they rejoined the others to begin the journey to Grant County, Beatrice felt a sense of peace that had eluded her since the night of her father's murder. The path ahead was clear now: justice for those she had lost, and then a return to this man who had risked everything for her. A new beginning, born from the ashes of tragedy. She glanced back at the meadow and the small cabin as they rode away, fixing the image in her memory. This place, these mountains, would forever be a turning point in her life, the place where she had found not only safety but the promise of something she had never truly expected to find. Love in the midst of danger, hope rising from despair, and a future she could now eagerly anticipate. The journey to Grant County took 2 days, during which Beatrice found herself increasingly anticipating the moment when she would be free to return to Jake's ranch. Sheriff Miller proved to be as honorable and efficient as her father had believed, taking her detailed statement about the marshal's murder and ensuring that Frank Mitchell and his gang were securely held in the county jail to await trial. "The federal authorities will be here within the week," Miller informed her after she had completed her testimony. "With your statement and the evidence we've collected, those men will hang for what they did." "Good," Beatrice said firmly, thinking of her father and the U.S. Marshal, whose families had been torn apart by the Outlaws' actions. "Justice needs to be served." "It will be," Miller assured her. He hesitated, then continued. "I knew your father well, Miss Jones. Samuel was one of the most honest men I ever met. He'd be proud of what you've done, facing down those killers to see justice done." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes at the mention of her father. "Thank you, Sheriff. That means a great deal to me." "Now," Miller said, his tone lightening slightly, "about that cowboy who helped you." "Young, I believe his name was. Seemed like there might be something developing there. Beatrice felt a blush warming her cheeks. Mr. Young was very kind to me. He risked his life to protect a complete stranger. Miller's eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. In my experience, Miss Jones, a man doesn't look at a woman the way that Cowboy looked at you if she's just a complete stranger. And I don't think I'm overstepping to say you seem to return the sentiment. Perhaps, Beatrice admitted, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. I've told him I'll return to his ranch once my business here is concluded. Well then, the sheriff said with a satisfied nod, I'd say that's a fine plan. Jake Young has a reputation as a good man, quiet, keeps to himself mostly, but honest and hardworking. You could do worse. Yes, Beatrice agreed softly. I believe I could. The next few days passed in a blur of official statements, meetings with the circuit judge who arrived to prepare for the trial, and arrangements for the journey back to Jake's ranch. Sheriff Miller had insisted on providing an escort, 2 deputies who would see her safely to her destination. Not taking any chances, he had explained when she protested that it wasn't necessary. The Mitchell gang had friends, and word travels fast about who testified against them. Finally, 2 weeks after arriving in Grant County, Beatrice found herself on horseback once more, traveling the now familiar trail toward the mountains where she had first encountered Harlan. This time, however, they would take the longer but easier route that bypassed the trapper's cabin, heading directly for Jake's ranch. As they descended from the high country into the rolling foothills, Beatrice felt a growing anticipation, a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. She thought of Jake, his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the gentleness beneath his weathered exterior. In the short time they had known each other, he had shown her what true courage looked like, not in grand gestures but in the steady commitment to doing what was right, regardless of the cost. By late afternoon of the 3rd day they crested a ridge, and there below them lay Jake's ranch, nestled in a small valley beside a stream. Smoke rose from the chimney of the modest house, and in the corral, several horses grazed peacefully. The sight brought an unexpected lump to Beatrice's throat. It looked like home in a way no place had since the night her father died. One of the deputies, a young man named Collins, noticed her expression and smiled. Looks like a nice place, Miss Jones. Yes, she agreed softly. It does. They rode down the slope toward the ranch, and as they approached, Beatrice saw a figure emerge from the barn, tall, broad-shouldered, familiar. Jake shaded his eyes against the late afternoon sun, watching their approach. Even at a distance, she could see the moment he recognized her, his posture changing, becoming more alert, more alive. He walked out to meet them as they reached the yard, his eyes never leaving Beatrice. She dismounted before he could reach her, suddenly impatient to stand on her own 2 feet, to bridge the distance between them under her own power. You came back, he said simply when they stood face to face, his voice holding a note of wonder as if he hadn't quite believed it would happen. I said I would, Beatrice replied, her heart racing at his nearness. The deputies, displaying a tactful awareness of the moment, made themselves busy with the horses, giving them a semblance of privacy. The Mitchell gang, Jake asked, his eyes searching hers. In jail awaiting trial, she confirmed. Sheriff Miller believes they'll hang for what they did. Jake nodded, satisfaction in his expression. Good. Your father deserved justice. Yes, Beatrice agreed. Then, gathering her courage, she added, but that chapter of my life is closed now. I'm ready for what comes next, if the offer still stands. Jake's expression softened, a smile warming his features in a way that made her breath catch. The offer more than stands, Beatrice. While you were gone, I added a room to the house. Thought you might appreciate having your own space at least, At first, the consideration behind the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you. That was very thoughtful." They stood for a moment in silence, both aware of the watching deputies, both reluctant to say more in their presence. Finally, Jake cleared his throat. "You must be tired from the journey. Come inside, all of you. I've got coffee on, and there's stew for supper." The evening passed pleasantly, with Jake playing host to Beatrice and the two deputies. The house was as she remembered it, simple but comfortable, with an air of quiet domesticity that appealed to her after weeks of uncertainty and danger. The new room Jake had mentioned was small but carefully constructed, with a real bed, a chest of drawers, and even a small mirror hung on the wall, touches that spoke of his desire to make her feel welcome. After the meal, as the deputies settled in for the night in the barn, Beatrice and Jake found themselves alone on the porch, watching as stars emerged in the vast sky above. The night was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I kept wondering if you'd really come back," Jake admitted, breaking the companionable silence. "Thought maybe once you were safe in Grant County, surrounded by civilization again, you'd realize what you'd be giving up to come back to a place like this." Beatrice turned to look at him, studying his profile in the dim light spilling from the window behind them. "What would I be giving up? A father who's gone, a store that's burned to the ground. There was nothing left for me in Santa Fe, Jake." "There could have been," he pointed out. "A young woman like you, educated, capable, you could start over anywhere, build a new life." "I am starting over," she said simply. "Here, if you'll have me." Jake's gaze met hers, intense and searching. "Beatrice, are you sure? This is a hard life, especially for a woman. Isolated, rough at times. The work never ends and the rewards can be slow in coming." "I'm not afraid of hard work," she replied with a slight smile. "I ran my father's store with him since I was 16. I kept the books, ordered supplies, dealt with difficult customers. I may not know everything about ranch life, but I'm a quick learner." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "You are that. I've never seen anyone adapt so quickly to adversity as you did when the Mitchell gang was after you." "Besides," Beatrice continued, emboldened by his words, "there's something else drawing me here, something I've never found elsewhere." "And what's that?" Jake asked, though his eyes suggested he might already know the answer. "You," she said simply. "In all my life, I've never met a man like you, Jake Young. A man who would risk his life for a stranger, who lives by a code of honor not because it's easy or profitable, but because it's right." She took a deep breath, then added softly, "A man I could love given time." Jake's expression in that moment was one Beatrice knew she would remember for the rest of her life, a mixture of surprise, hope, and a joy so pure it transformed his weathered features, making him look years younger. Slowly, he reached out to take her hand, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of ranch work. "Beatrice Jones," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you running across that plain, refusing to give up despite the odds against you. I just didn't know if you could ever feel the same about a man like me. A man like you." Beatrice echoed, turning her hand to lace her fingers with his. "You mean a man of integrity, courage, and kindness. Why would I not?" Jake's laugh was soft, almost self-conscious. "When you put it that way, it does sound foolish." "Not foolish," she corrected gently. "Just unnecessary. I know my own heart, Jake, and it's telling me that this here, with you, is where I'm meant to be." He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles with a reverence that made her heart flutter. "Then stay, Beatrice. Not just for now, but for good. Build a life here with me. It won't always be easy, but I promise you this: you'll never face a single day of it alone." "Is that a proposal, Jake Young?" Beatrice asked, a smile playing at her lips despite the serious nature of the conversation. "I believe it is," he replied, matching her smile with one of his own. "Though I had planned something a bit more formal after you'd had time to settle in, but it seems my heart has other ideas." "Then my answer is yes," Beatrice said without hesitation. "Yes, I will stay. Yes, I will build a life here with you. And yes, I will marry you, Jake Young, whenever and however you wish." He released her hand only to cup her face gently between his palms, his eyes searching hers once more, as if to assure himself that this was real, that she truly meant what she said. Then, with a tenderness that belied his strength, he kissed her a kiss of promise, of commitment, of a future together that neither of them had dared to imagine just weeks before. When they parted, both slightly breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he murmured. "When I rode out that day and saw you being chased by those outlaws, I never imagined that firing that warning shot would change my life forever." "Nor did I," Beatrice admitted. "But I'm grateful for it, despite all that came before. Some things, it seems, are simply meant to be." The next morning, Beatrice awoke in her new room, momentarily disoriented until memory returned. She was at Jake's ranch, in the room he had built for her, and they had agreed to marry. The realization brought a smile to her face, and a warmth to her heart that had nothing to do with the early morning sunlight streaming through the small window. She dressed quickly in one of the few outfits she had acquired in Grant County. Sheriff Miller's wife had insisted on helping her replace the clothes she had lost when her father's store burned. The simple cotton dress was practical rather than fashionable, but it was clean and comfortable, suitable for the life she was choosing. When she emerged from her room, she found Jake already at the stove, frying bacon and brewing coffee. The domestic scene struck her with its rightness, as if she had been watching him prepare breakfast every morning for years, rather than this being the first time. "Good morning," she said, unable to keep a note of happiness from her voice. Jake turned, his face lighting up at the sight of her. "Good morning. Sleep well, better than I have in weeks," Beatrice admitted, moving to his side to peer at the skillet. "That smells wonderful." "Just bacon and eggs," Jake said with a self-deprecating shrug. "Nothing fancy but filling." "It's perfect," she assured him, impulsively leaning up to kiss his cheek. The simple gesture seemed to catch him off guard, a flush spreading across his face that had nothing to do with the heat of the stove. But he smiled, his free arm slipping around her waist for a brief squeeze before he turned his attention back to the cooking. The deputies joined them for breakfast, and afterward, as they prepared to depart for the return journey to Grant County, the older of the two, Deputy Williams, pulled Jake aside. "Sheriff Miller asked me to give you this," he said, handing over a folded paper. "Said it might come in handy, given what he suspected might develop between you and Miss Jones." Jake unfolded the paper to find a marriage license, already partially filled out, requiring only their signatures and that of an officiant. He looked up at the deputy in surprise. Williams grinned. "Sheriff's also a justice of the peace. Figured you might not want to wait for the circuit preacher to come through. He said to tell you that if you're both agreed, I'm authorized to witness the signing and bring it back legal and binding." Jake glanced toward Beatrice, who was speaking with the younger deputy near the horses, unaware of the conversation. "That's mighty thoughtful of Sheriff Miller, and timely too, as it happens." "Thought as much," Williams nodded, his expression approving. "She's a fine woman, Young. Been through hell and come out standing, that's rare." "Don't I know it?" Jake agreed softly. "Don't I know it?" After the deputies had departed, the marriage license signed and official, witnessed by both men and bearing the seal of Grant County, Jake and Beatrice stood in the yard of what was now truly their home, watching as the dust from the departing horses hooves settled back to earth. Mrs. Young, Jake said experimentally, testing the sound of it. Beatrice Young. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? I do, Beatrice agreed, leaning against his side as his arm circled her shoulders. Though I must admit, when I woke up this morning, I didn't expect to be a married woman by noon. Jake's laugh was rich and warm in the midday sun. Life has a way of surprising us, it seems. A month ago, I was a solitary rancher with little prospect of that changing. Now I'm a married man. Any regrets? Beatrice asked, only half teasing. A small part of her still worried that he might have been swept up in the moment, in the romance of rescue and danger. Jake turned to face her fully, his hands coming to rest lightly on her waist. Not a single one, he said with a certainty that dispelled her doubts. I've lived enough to know what matters, Beatrice, and what matters is right here in front of me. The kiss that followed sealed the promise between them, a commitment made not in haste but with clear eyes and full hearts, both recognizing in the other a kindred spirit, a partner for the journey ahead. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into a rhythm of shared life and work. Beatrice proved a quick study in the ways of ranch living, learning to ride with greater skill, to tend the vegetable garden Jake had started but never quite maintained, to cook over an open hearth, and even to help with the livestock when needed. Jake, in turn, found himself adapting to the presence of a wife in what had been his solitary domain. He took pleasure in small adjustments, moving his gun belt from the back of a chair to a peg by the door, making space in the small bedroom they now shared for her few possessions, listening to her voice filling the previously quiet house with conversation, or occasionally song as she went about her tasks. A month after their impromptu wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, Jake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, holding it out to Beatrice. I've been saving for this since before we were married, he explained as she took the simple gold band set with a small diamond. Ordered it from a jeweler in Santa Fe. The deputy brought it back when he returned with the signed marriage license. I've been waiting for the right moment to give it to you. Beatrice looked at the ring in wonder, then at Jake, her eyes bright with unshed tears. It's beautiful, but you didn't need to, I wanted to, he interrupted gently. Every proper wife should have a wedding ring. And you, Beatrice Young, are the most proper and improper wife a man could ask for. She laughed at the apparent contradiction. Improper. Well, Jake grinned, slipping the ring onto her finger where it fit perfectly. Proper women don't generally get married within hours of accepting a proposal, nor do they end up as ranchers' wives after being pursued by notorious outlaws. But I wouldn't have it any other way. Nor would I, Beatrice agreed, admiring how the last rays of sunlight caught the diamond, sending prisms of light dancing across their intertwined hands. It all happened so quickly, yet it feels as if we've known each other much longer. Some people take years to learn what truly matters, Jake observed. We had the advantage of danger to strip away the non-essentials. Nothing reveals a person's true character like facing death together. Beatrice nodded, remembering the terrifying chase across the plain, the tense standoff with the Mitchell gang, the gunfight at Harlan's cabin. I saw who you were in those moments, Jake, not just brave but principled. You didn't have to help me, most wouldn't have, but you did without hesitation. And I saw who you were, Jake replied softly. Not a victim but a fighter. You could have hidden, changed your name, disappeared. Instead, you were determined to see justice done, no matter the risk to yourself. How could I not fall in love with such courage? The confession, spoken so plainly, warmed Beatrice's heart. In their month of marriage, They had expressed their growing feelings in many ways through touch, through acts of consideration, through the comfortable silences that grew between them, but neither had directly spoken the word love since that night on the porch when they had agreed to marry. "I love you too, Jake Young," she said, turning to face him fully. "Not for saving me, though I'll always be grateful for that, but for who you are every day since the man who built me a room so I'd feel welcome, who teaches me patiently when I don't know how to do something, who holds me at night when memories of my father's death wake me with tears." Jake's kiss in response was tender, a reaffirmation of the bond that had formed between them with such unexpected speed, yet such undeniable strength. When they parted, he kept her close, their foreheads touching in the gathering dusk. "I never thought I'd find this," he admitted. "After the war I was lost, seen too much, done things I wasn't proud of, figured the best I could hope for was a quiet life, keeping to myself, making some small difference in my own corner of the world. And now," Beatrice prompted gently when he fell silent. Jake's smile was visible even in the fading light, transforming his features from handsome to truly beautiful in her eyes. "Now I have a partner to share it with, someone who makes the quiet moments richer and the hard times bearable, someone worth protecting, worth building a future for." As darkness settled fully around them, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across the vast canvas of the New Mexico sky, they sat together in comfortable silence, the promises exchanged requiring no further words. In each other, they had found not just love, but home, a sanctuary in an often harsh land, a place where the best parts of themselves could flourish. And if, in years to come, they sometimes told the story of how they met to their children, first a son, James, born just over a year after their marriage, and later twin daughters, Sarah and Elizabeth, they never glossed over the danger and fear of those first days. Instead, they spoke of how sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures, and how a single act of courage, a warning shot fired into the air, a hand extended to someone in need, can change the course of two lives forever. For Beatrice and Jake Young, what had begun in desperate flight and unexpected rescue had transformed into a love that sustained them through all the challenges of ranch life in the untamed West, drought years and prosperous ones, joys and sorrows, births, and eventually the passing of old friends like Harlan and Sheriff Miller. Through it all, their bond only deepened, tempered by shared experience and mutual respect, growing into the kind of enduring love that becomes legend in a family's history, passed down through generations as an example of what is possible when courage meets kindness, when principle overcomes fear, when two hearts recognize in each other their